The barn is warm enough. She said it standing in the middle of his kitchen, with her gloves still on, and her trunk out on the porch where the freight driver had dropped it, and she said it the way a woman says a thing she has already decided and does not intend to be argued out of. Judah Vance had his hand on the latch of the second door. It was the only other door in the house. Behind it there was a bed and a washstand and a window with a shutter that closed, and he had been standing there holding it open for the better part of a minute. There's a room. I saw it. It's got a stove wall behind it. It holds heat from the kitchen all night. I'm sure it does. Kora Balfour pulled the second glove off finger by finger. I'll take the tack room. Out in the front room, 6 years old and flat on his stomach on the floor with his chin on his hands, Beck Vance watched the whole of it through the doorway and did not make a sound. His father let the latch go. The door swung a few inches and stopped. "Ma'am, it's the 16th of November. In Montana. I've wintered in worse." That was not true, and she suspected he knew it. She had wintered in Kansas, where the cold was mean but sensible, and she had never in her life laid down to sleep with only a plank wall between herself and a night that could kill a cow standing. She had also, in Kansas, been let go from a good position and given no reason for it that anybody would say out loud, and had learned afterward from a laundress that the reason had been a widower and a hallway and a woman in the next county who had seen nothing and told everybody. She was 32 years old. She had one trunk and one quilt and $8 and a letter answering an advertisement in the Wicket Sentinel, and she was not going to hand a second town the same knife. "The tack room," she repeated. Judah Vance looked at her a while. Then he took his coat off the hook and went out to the porch and came back with the trunk on his shoulder. And he carried it past her and out the kitchen door and across the yard to the barn without another word about it. The boy on the floor watched him go. Then he rolled over and looked at the woman standing in his mother's kitchen with her gloves in her hand, and Kora looked back, and neither of them said anything, and that was the first conversation they had. The advertisement had asked for a housekeeper and cook for a working ranch, 1 man and 1 child, references required, and it had not mentioned that the man could not keep a housekeeper past the spring. He told her that part himself the first evening, because he was not a man who let another person find out a thing later that he could have handed them at the start. There had been 3. The first had gone home to Ohio in April of the year Elsie died. The second had lasted 11 months and married a surveyor. The third had come in May and left in August and had not liked the wind, which was a reason Kora considered fair. "It blows here. It blows from October to about the end of April, and then it thinks about it some more." The Vance place ran along Sweetgrass Creek, 4 sections of deeded ground and a lease on the bench above it, and it was neither prosperous nor failing. There were 2 hired men. Rufus Dade, who had been there since before Elsie and slept in the bunk room off the horse barn, and a boy of 18 called Tolly, who had been there since June and ate like a threshing crew. There were 300 head on the bench. There was a house with 2 rooms and a lean-to, and a barn that was better built than the house, because the man who homesteaded the place had put up the barn first and then run out of ambition. The kitchen had been kept the way a man keeps a kitchen. Everything in it was where somebody had last put it down. Kora had it in order by the end of the second day. That was not remarkable, and she did not think it was. She scrubbed the table and turned the flour and found weevils in the middle of the barrel and got them out. And she found a crock of butter in the lean-to gone rancid in September and buried it. And she made a list of what the house was short of and gave it to Judah on Thursday morning. And he read it standing at the door with the paper held a little away from him and his jaw set. He read it slowly. She noticed the slowness and put it away without remarking on it. "That's a good deal of soda. There's a good deal of bread coming." He put the list in his shirt pocket. "Rufus goes in Saturday. He'll bring it. Beck did not speak to her for 4 days. He was not sullen about it, and he was not frightened of her. He simply had not decided yet. And he was 6. And he had the great advantage of a child in that nobody expects you to explain your position. He ate what she put in front of him. He said thank you when his father's eye came around to him. He watched her from doorways and from under the table, and once from the top of the woodpile where he had gone to be out of the wind, and he tracked her through the day the way you track weather. On the 5th morning he came into the kitchen and stood at her elbow while she was working the dough and said, without any preliminaries, that his mother had used a red bowl. "Is it still here?" "On the high shelf." "Papa put it up there and I can't get it." Kora dried her hands and got the stool and took the red bowl down off the high shelf and set it on the table, and then she stood and considered it, because the question of what to do with it was not hers to answer. Do you want it used, or do you want it kept? Beck thought about it seriously. Used, he decided. So she used it. She used it that morning and every morning after, and when Judah came in for dinner and saw it sitting on the table with flour in the bottom of it, he stopped in the doorway with his hat halfway off his head. Then he hung the hat and washed his hands and sat down, and he ate a very good dinner, and he did not say one word about the bowl. The cold came in on the 22nd. It came the way that country's cold comes, which is not gradually. The wind quit at about 10 in the evening, and that was the sign of it, and by midnight the still air over Sweetgrass Creek had dropped past anything a thermometer on that place was equipped to measure. Kora woke at 3 because her feet had gone past aching into something quieter. She got up in the dark of the tack room and put on her coat over her nightdress and her stockings and her boots, and she folded the quilt over the foot of the cot and stood there stamping and swinging her arms until the feeling came back, and then she went out and lit the kitchen stove 2 hours before she needed to and sat in front of the open door of it with her hands out. She was gone from the kitchen by 4, out to the henhouse with a lantern to see what the night had cost her. Judah came into the barn at 4:10 for the horse liniment, which was in the tack room on the shelf by the door, and he went in with the lantern low and got it, and on the way out the light swung across the cot. The quilt was still folded where she had left it. He stopped. He put the lantern on the barrel, and he reached out and took the top corner of it between his finger and his thumb, and it did not give. It had gone stiff clear through. There was a white rime worked into the seams of it, fine as sugar, and following every line of the stitching, which is what happens to a bed when the breath of a sleeping person has been going into it all night in a room that never once got above freezing. He lifted the corner, and it came up in one piece, like board. It was a pieced quilt, old, worn thin at the middle, where quilts go thin. Somebody had made it by hand a long time ago out of dress goods, and the pieces at the center had been washed so many times you could see the batting through the weave, and there was not enough left of it to keep a dog warm in that room on that night. Judah Vance stood in his own barn at 4:10 in the morning, holding the frozen corner of a woman's quilt, and did not move for the better part of a minute. Then he set it down exactly as he had found it, and he took the lantern and the liniment and went out, and he shut the barn door behind him quiet enough that the horses did not shift. He did not say anything to her about it at breakfast. She was in the kitchen with her sleeves pushed up and the coffee going and the stove roaring, and she looked well enough, and she said good morning, and she asked how the roan's leg was, and he told her, and that was the whole of breakfast. What he did that day was go up on the bench in weather that had no business having a man out in it and count his cattle, and come back at dusk with his face raw and his mind made up about something he was not ready to say. He went and got a look at the tack room ceiling that evening while she was in the house. There was a gap along the north plate, the width of 2 fingers, where the barn had settled off the sill, and it ran the whole length of that wall, and the cold had been pouring in through it all night every night for 6 nights. Beck found him there, standing on a barrel with a lantern in his hand. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing," his father told him. "Go on into your supper." The boy went, but he went slowly, and on the way past the cot he stopped and put his hand flat on the folded quilt the way you do when you want to know a thing for yourself, and he stood there a second, and then he went on out. Beck brought his quilt out on the Tuesday. He did it at the hour after supper when his father was at the desk in the front room and Kora was finishing in the kitchen. And he did it very carefully, dragging it down off his bed and out the kitchen door with most of it off the ground, and he took it across the frozen yard to the barn and put it on the tackroom cot and folded it the way he had seen her fold hers, badly, and came back in and got into bed. Kora found it at 9 and carried it back to the house and put it on the boy where he lay pretending to be asleep, and she tucked it in at the sides and she went out again. He took it out again Wednesday. She brought it back Wednesday. He took it out again Thursday, and this time he put a rock on it. A good flat creek rock the size of a saucer, which he had thought about, and which he set square in the middle of the folded quilt so that the matter would be understood as settled. Kora stood in the tack room on Thursday night with the lantern in her hand and looked at that rock for a long while. Then she left it where it was, and she slept warm for the first time since the 16th of November. And she cried about it a little in the dark, where nobody could hear her, which she would have denied to anyone who asked. Judah saw the whole business. He had seen it Tuesday from the front room window, and Wednesday from the barn door, and Thursday from the corral fence, and he had not intervened in any part of it. And he did not mention it at any meal. But on Friday morning, Beck woke up under 2 quilts. His father had gone into Wicket on Thursday and bought one, a heavy gray wool thing off the shelf at the mercantile, $4.50, and had come home and put it on his son's bed on top of the empty place where the other one had been, and had not said anything about that either. Beck lay under it and worked out what it meant. Then he got up and went to breakfast and ate an enormous amount of it, and he talked that morning more than he had talked in the whole of the preceding 2 weeks, mostly about a badger. Kora listened to every word of it and asked him 3 questions about the badger, and Judah sat at the end of his own table drinking his coffee and watching his son tell a woman about a badger, and he did not join in, and he did not need to. The notice had come in September, and it was in the desk under a seed catalog. Kora found it in the first week of December when she was after brown paper. It was from the land office at Miles City, and it concerned the water right on the lower half of Sweetgrass Creek, and there was a neighbor's name on it and a date. And the date was the 11th of December. She read it twice, and then she took it out to the horse barn where he was working on a hamestrap. "Did you answer this?" He knew what it was before he had it in his hand. She could tell by the set of his shoulders when he saw the paper. "It's not a thing that needs answering. It says here that if it isn't answered by the 11th, the claim goes uncontested. Rufus read it in September. He said it was a survey notice. Rufus was wrong." Judah put the hamestrap down on the bench. He stood there with his back half to her, and the barn was very quiet, and one of the horses shifted in the dark at the far end of it. "I get through print." He put the strap end down. Slow. Elsie did the papers. He got that out in one piece and stopped, and Kora understood exactly what it had cost him and did not make him pay any more for it than he already had. "Then I'll do the papers." She put the notice on the bench beside the hamestrap, starting with this one. "Tonight, because we have got 5 days, and it wants a sworn statement and a witness." He turned around. "You'll do the papers. I have a good hand, and I can figure, and I have written to a land office before." It's not a favor. It's the job you hired, or it ought to have been. They did it that night at the kitchen table, with a lamp between them and Becca's sleep in the other room. She wrote the answer and read it back to him out loud, all of it, twice, and where he wanted a thing said differently, he said so, and she changed it. He signed it. Rufus Dade witnessed it on Saturday, and it went to Miles City on the Monday stage, and it was in the land office on the 9th. The claim failed. The water right held. Judah did not thank her for it in words. What he did instead was come in on the following Thursday with a wooden box under his arm, hinged, with a lock and a key, and he set it on the kitchen table. Every paper in that desk, the deeds, the lease, the tax receipts, the note from the bank, it's all going in there, and you'll have the key. That's your whole place in a box. I know what's in it. He put the key on the table beside it. You'll do it right. Frances Delaney came out from Miles City on the 18th of December. She was Elsie's older sister, and she had a good coat and a hard-won kindness about the eyes. And she came out on the stage and hired a rig at Wicket and arrived at 11 in the morning with 2 parcels wrapped in brown paper for Beck and a look on her face that said she had come about something. She had heard, she said, over the tea Kora poured her. She had heard from Mrs. Pruitt on the Bearpaw Road, who had it from the Mercantile. A woman, living out at the place. No relation. And the child 6 years old with no schooling and no church and no woman in the house at all. She set her cup down. Judah, I am not here to accuse anybody of anything. I am here because Elsie was my sister, and that boy is the last of her, and I have a house in Miles City with a school 4 streets from it. There's a woman in the house all day. And where does she sleep? Nobody answered that. Frances looked from one of them to the other, and her face changed, and what came into it was not triumph. It was worse than that. It was pity. Her hand went to the edge of the table. Oh, Judah, it was my choosing, not his. He offered me the room the hour I came, and I refused it in front of the child, and I refused it because I had a name taken off me once in Kansas by people who were guessing, and I would not give this town anything to guess at. She kept her voice level. You may think that's foolish. I have thought so myself once or twice at 4 in the morning. But it was mine to decide, and I decided it. And Mr. Vance has done nothing in this house that his own son couldn't watch. I believe you. Frances Delaney folded her hands. That is not the difficulty. The difficulty is that in Wicket and in Miles City it will not matter one particle what is true. She looked at Judah. I can take him. He'd be warm, and he'd be schooled, and he would be with his mother's people, and in 5 years nobody would remember any of this. I am asking. I have not gone to anybody, and I don't intend to. But I am asking. Judah Vance sat at his own table and did not answer, because there was no answer in him that he could get to come out. And then Frances Delaney, who was a decent woman and was trying to do it decently, turned in her chair to the boy sitting on the floor by the woodbox with a parcel unopened in his lap and asked him, Beck, would you like to come and live with me in town? The boy did not answer. He got up off the floor and put the parcel on the seat of the chair carefully, the way you set down something that belongs to somebody who has been kind to you. Then he walked out of the kitchen and out the door into the cold in his shirt sleeves, and the door banged, and the 3 adults sat in the kitchen, and none of them went after him. Kora started up once. Judah put his hand flat on the table and she stopped. They heard the barn door. They heard nothing for a while after that. Then the barn door again, and the boy's boots coming back across the frozen yard, slow, because he was hauling something heavier than he was. He came in backward through the kitchen door, dragging the quilt behind him. Not the gray wool one off his own bed. The other one. the thin-pieced one out of dress goods with the batting showing through the middle of it, which had lain folded on that cot since the night his father found it frozen, and which he had gone out and got in his shirt sleeves in December because it was the only argument he had. He hauled it across the floor and he heaved it up onto the settee by the stove, and then he climbed up and sat down on top of it in front of his aunt, 6 years old, out of breath, with his chin up. She sleeps cold. The stove ticked. Nobody moved. That's hers. It goes hard in the night. I put mine out there and Papa saw me do it, and he never said stop. He got a breath. Papa knows she sleeps cold. He's known since the frost got in it, and he hasn't fixed it yet. Then he put both hands down flat on the quilt on either side of him, holding it, and he looked at his aunt and delivered the rest of it. You can take me. But she comes. Frances Delaney put her hand over her mouth. Judah Vance stood up out of his chair so fast it went over backward onto the floor behind him, and he did not pick it up. He was in the barn before the sound of the chair had finished. What he did that afternoon he did without help and without stopping. He tore the north wall of the tack room out to the studs, and he chinked the plate gap with oakum and lime and nailed a double course of boards over it. He cut a hole in the roof and flashed it with a sheet of tin off the machine shed and set up the little sheet iron stove that had been sitting in the granary since the year the homesteader quit, and he ran the pipe and he built the box for the wood. He worked until 8 in the evening. Rufus came out at some point and offered to hold a board and was told to go on in to his supper. Tolly did not offer. At 8 he came into the kitchen with his hands split open across the knuckles from the cold and the wire, and he stood in the middle of the floor in his coat with the sawdust on him. It's done. That room will hold a fire all night now, and it's tight to the sill. Kora had the lamp trimmed and the supper kept back for him, and she did not sit down. Good. I'm sleeping in it. She stopped with the plate in her hand. You'll take the house, you and Beck. There's 2 rooms in it and a door on each, and Frances can write it down and swear to it and take it to every woman on the Bearpaw Road if she cares to. He got the words up out of somewhere and put them down flat. I have had you sleeping in my barn for 1 month because I could not think of a way to fix it that you would let me fix. My son thought of it in about 4 seconds. He is 6. Judah, I'm not done. He took his hat off and turned it. That quilt was frozen through on the morning of the 23rd. I picked it up off that cot, and it came up in one piece, and I put it back down, and I went out, and I said nothing to you about it, because you had told me the barn was warm enough, and I had decided that respecting a thing you said was the same as doing right by you. The hat went around once more. It is not the same. I've had a month to learn that, and it took a boy with a rock to teach me. Kora set the plate down on the table. Ask me the other thing. He looked up. You've been standing there 5 minutes working around to it. Ask me the other thing, and then eat your supper, because it's gone cold twice already. So he asked her, in his own kitchen with the sawdust on his coat and his hands split across the knuckles, and it took him 11 words, and he did not get any of them wrong. Frances Delaney stayed through to the 27th and went back to Miles City on the stage with a jar of chokecherry preserve on her lap and an invitation for the wedding in March. She had said her piece before she left, standing at the rig with her gloves on. She had said that she would tell it in Miles City exactly as she had found it, which was a man sleeping in his own barn in January and his boy sleeping under 2 quilts, and that she would say it to Mrs. Pruitt first and at length. Judah slept in the tack room until the 11th of March. The stove held. He never once mentioned that it held. They were married on a Saturday by a preacher who came out from Wicket, with Rufus Dade standing up for the groom in a coat that had last been worn to a funeral, and Beck holding the ring in his fist the entire way through the ceremony because he had been given a job and intended to do it properly. The thin quilt did not go back on any bed. Kora washed it and mended the worn middle of it with a piece of good linen and bound the edge where the binding had gone, and it hangs now over the back of the chair nearest the kitchen stove in the warmest corner of that house, where the heat off the firebox gets into it all day long and stays in it through the night. Beck sits on it to take his boots off. He has done that since he was 6, and he does it still, and in that kitchen nobody has ever suggested he sit somewhere else.